Kirby Smart brought his fastball this week. Well, in the last couple of weeks. He sat down with Chris Lowe of ESPN and had a conversation that if you are a Georgia Bulldog fan that you have followed this program and this coach regularly during his time in Athens, the things we're going to talk about tonight are not going to come as much of a surprise to you. But if somehow you've been under a rock and you haven't been following as closely as maybe some other dog fans have been following, Kirby Smart brought his fastball, and it's going to seem and sound like a revelation to you. Maybe. Welcome back into this week's edition of How About That DAWGSCAST. I have to say that when Kirby Smart steps to a podium, he knows exactly what he's going to say. He doesn't just wander up there and not have a game plan for what he wants to accomplish. Much like many great coaches across the landscape of sports over the years, they understand that sometimes in order to reach their teams in a way that is outside of the norm, right? Maybe they get tired of hearing them speak after practice or in team meetings. Sometimes you have to go through the media to get their attention because they know, especially in today's college football world, that all of these young men are on social media in some form or another. And if they're not, then the people close to them are, and they're going to be in their ear about what it is that they've seen. So I don't know exactly how you formulate a plan, right? Because I've never actually done it. But I think I have a pretty good idea of what I would do. I have a pretty good idea of how I would go about it. And in a lot of ways, it would be exactly the way Kirby Smart goes about it. Kirby definitely brought his fastball when he sat down with Chris Lowe of ESPN recently. And he had more than a little bit to say about the current state of his program, where he thinks it's going, why they think, or why he thinks Georgia is who they are. And we're going to touch on all of those things after this. Y'all know we talk about champions, and that's why I want to tell you about the Premier difference with a Premier Club membership from Premier Heating and Air. Regardless of the changes that come with the seasons, winter, spring, summer, or football, some things will never change. I'm going to be comfortable in my own home, and the comfort and well-being of my family will always be my top priority. If you feel the same way, choosing Premier Heating and Air is the play to take care of all of your family's needs when it comes to keeping you cool and comfortable in your home or business. Whether you're looking to keep your current HVAC system running at peak performance, you need to replace an aging system, or you're adding on to your home and need to upgrade to a larger heating and air system, which is what I did a few years back when we built an addition onto our home, Premier Heating and Air has got you covered. Be sure to check out their Premier Club membership offer to keep your home heating and cooling systems running at peak performance and avoid costly repairs in the future. Just click the link in the description below today to get started and give yourself the gift of time, freedom, and peace of mind to focus on the most important things in your life. The choice is clear, y'all. You've just got to experience Premier. When Kirby Smart sat down with Chris Lowe of ESPN for a recent interview, you have to keep in mind that he knows he's not just talking to the Georgia faithful. He knows that he's talking to the nation as a whole. He's talking to the entire college football world, because Chris Lowe is somebody who's been in and around the sport of college football for decades. And when Chris writes a piece on a coach specifically, you can pretty much bank on the fact that it's going to be a well-written piece of journalism. Kirby knows this. I mean, clearly he's not new to the process. So when he sat down with Chris to do this interview, they covered a wide range of topics. And you can still find it. It's up on ESPN right now. You can go give it a look. And obviously it was titled Kirby Smart Q&A. After the Dogs fell short last year of the three-peat, what is going on at the University of Georgia? Now, you might wonder why somebody would ask a question like that. Because if you follow football closely, you have a pretty good understanding of where Georgia is right now, and where we all sort of collectively expect them to be heading into the 2024 season. But rest assured, you might not believe it. There are people out there who are, and you can call it Georgia fatigue, you can call it just straight up bias, whatever you want to do. I was listening to some people just yesterday have a discussion about how Georgia is a fraud. Not a fraud in the sense that they are not a good football team, but a fraud in the sense that they are not in any way any different than, say, the other top 3 or 4 programs in the country. And I think we all have a pretty good idea of who those programs are. Now, on its face, that doesn't sound like it's any sort of major disrespect or anything like that. But as this person continued to talk, it just showed me more and more that they were coming into the conversation from a position of preconceived ideas and without actually having done any research on the program itself as it's constituted today. So they were mentioning things that were clearly off base that could have been learned if they had only bothered to take the time to do so. So there are people out there who are looking at Georgia and they have an opinion. Again, I'm not sure if it's Georgia fatigue or if it's something else, but they just really don't want Georgia to be at the forefront of the conversation right now. And that's fine. This is college football. People come at it with biases from all angles for all kinds of reasons. That's not the reason we're doing this podcast tonight. I wanted to spend some time actually talking about what Chris and Kirby talked about when they sat down together. And like I mentioned, they went through a lot of things in this discussion. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I would suggest that you head on over there. It's up for free. You can check it out. There's no problem. But it talks about how Kirby obviously came back to his alma mater 8 years ago. This is now Kirby's 9th season in Athens, or will be. And when he stepped into the situation at Georgia following the years of Coach Mark Richt, it wasn't like Georgia was not a good program. It wasn't like Georgia had not been relevant for the entire 21st century. Since Coach Richt came to Athens, the Dogs averaged 10 wins a season. You might say, who else has done that over that stretch? Not many. Now, if you look back to the early 2000s, you could look at powerhouse programs like LSU, like Alabama, who were having a little bit of a thin stretch right through there. Now, don't get me wrong, Georgia wasn't a world beater back then, but it just speaks to the consistency of what Georgia had built. Now, obviously, things sort of turned around for both of those programs, LSU and Alabama. And Auburn, who was stronger in the early part of the 21st century and has since fallen back. So it's the ebb and flow of college football. This happens for all programs all the time. But the one thing that was consistent over that period was that Georgia was a very good program that would cycle up every few years to be a legitimate national championship contender. Now, on its surface, that's the sort of thing that makes complete sense. You're like, of course, that's how it works. You have upperclassmen who stick around, you get good players, and, every few years you can take your shot at the crown. But then Nick Saban at Alabama happened, and things changed, and we had a new definition that we hadn't seen for a few years. Once Pete Carroll left from USC, there was a gap in there where nobody was really dominating the sport. And then Saban stepped into that gap at Alabama and did what he did over in Tuscaloosa. So that sort of corrupted the way everybody looked at college football, because now if you're not doing that, then you're just not successful. And you see it. If you spend any time on the internet as a college football fan, there are going to be jacklegs out there who want to tell you that averaging 10 wins a year for 20 seasons somehow is irrelevant. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely insane that you would take that position. It shows that you're not to be taken seriously as a real college football fan, because it means you're just missing the things that are right in front of your face. So, again, looking at where Georgia was when Coach Richt was there and where they weren't, which was at the top of the mountain, that was the impetus to bring Kirby Smart to Athens. I believe it was Steve Spurrier who said, once you spend 10 years, maybe 15 years in one place, that's long enough. It's time to go. Now, you can say what you want about whether or not you agree with that, but I mean, look at it. He spent about that amount of time at Florida and left. Florida has never been the same. They actually had a couple of years there where they were better than the overall run under Spurrier, but it was different for Steve Spurrier at Florida because he was at his alma mater. He had personal grudges. He took the SEC by storm and raised a Florida program that historically looks more like they look today than they looked during his tenure. The blips on the radar for the Florida program were Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer. The rest of the football program at Florida has looked a lot like it has looked over the last few years. So I always find it kind of funny when the Florida fans have something to say about, well, anything really. And everybody knows I have a tremendous disdain for the University of Florida and the Gators, but I don't want to get sidetracked on that too far because I want to keep going along this trail. So Spurrier was at Florida for about 15 years. And then you look at Nick over at Alabama, he was there for 17. And then even he was like, yeah, it's time to move on. Each man had their own reasons. Spurrier went on to coach again. I doubt Saban will, but the point remains the same. And it's a good one. You only have a window of time where everybody is happy and pulling in the same direction before it starts to feel just a little stale. And that's sort of what had happened to Coach Mark Richt. Great man, great coach. Raised Georgia to a level they hadn't been at in 2 decades. But he seemingly, for whatever reason, was not the guy that was going to take Georgia to that next level. Enter Kirby Smart. It sort of mirrors the Spurrier situation at Florida in that he was a high-profile coordinator who comes in, raises his alma mater to a level that it had not seen prior. That's one of the things that started off the conversation when Kirby sat down with Chris Lowe. And if you skim through the article, you can see. I mean, they mentioned that Georgia's won 2 national titles under Kirby Smart. They've played for a third, 13 wins in each of the last 3 seasons. So it's not like Kirby is not making hay at the University of Georgia. And then they start to touch on the fact that Georgia, over the last 7 seasons, because the first season in Athens, Kirby Smart flat out called a failure by his standards. You're like, wait a minute. They went like 8-5, and they won a bowl game for a first-year head coach. How can that be considered a failure? It just sort of lets you know where Kirby Smart is headed. We didn't know it at the time. He would prove it over the coming years. But in his mind, just being mediocre and winning a bowl game was nowhere near what he was brought to Georgia to do. So as he and Chris Lowe sat around and discussed things that are going on in the world of college football, they got into all of that consistency talk. And Kirby flat told him, he's like, I was brought here to win championships. But the thing that he's the most proud of is the fact that over the last 7 seasons, Georgia has been consistent at an elite level. Nobody else can say that they finished in the top 7 at the very end for the past 7 years. You can't find it, not even Alabama. So it's not like Kirby doesn't appreciate the work that he and everyone else has done in Athens. He gets it. He understands that it's hard to win in college football today, and that consistency is to be valued because you can't obviously become elite unless you first show your consistency. It just so happens that for Kirby Smart, consistency means 13 wins a season, 12 wins a season, competing for SEC championships every season, making the playoff every season. And as they continued to talk, we see that they get into more and more of these things. And one of the first areas they discussed was the fact that, you have the college football playoff now. So Georgia had been in a position where if they weren't in the playoff since it began, they were right outside the top four. A break here, a break there, a vote here or there, and they're in the tournament every season. And it's like Kirby Smart said after his first national championship. What it comes down to is at bats. You have to be in the conversation. You have to be in the tournament to win the thing, the way it's currently set up. And what they're talking about in this discussion that he had with Chris Lowe is that, yeah, there were times when Georgia was right there, and where they didn't get in the past, they were going to have a better opportunity to get in there in the future. And that's where it turned to the talk of titles. What does it look like for Kirby Smart in Athens? And frankly, he just came out and said it. I don't want a player to leave Georgia without a championship. Now, I didn't do the quick, like, back of the napkin math here to figure out exactly how many players since Kirby Smart took over in 2016 have actually suffered that fate, have had to leave Athens through graduation without having. Now, I'm saying through graduation. Kirby didn't say that, but I assume that's what he meant. If you come and play for 4 years or 5 years, depending on a red shirt, in that window, he wants you to be able to say you won a national championship. We're not talking about transfers and things like that. We're talking about players who go to a school, play their time, and then, move on once they're finished. So clearly in 21 and then again in 22, he's standing on firm footing there. So the clock starts again, right? So 22. So now you're looking at freshmen who came in the 22 class. So you're looking at between 22 and 26. What does that mean, right? How many players are going to come through Athens and not have an opportunity to win a championship? Now, again, we could look at it, break it down just a little bit further here. He says a championship. I am making the presumption here that he's referring to national championships. Now, he might actually just be talking about SEC championships. And if that's the case, more power to him and more power to all those players, because who doesn't want to win an SEC conference championship? Of course you do. It's the preeminent league in the land. You want to get out there and show that you're the best in that league. But maybe somebody needs to pin him down on that a little bit. But I think it's a safe assumption that Kirby was referring to national championships, because after back-to-back titles in 21 and 22, what Kirby Smart is absolutely responsible for is raising the floor of the program and the expectation levels at the University of Georgia. So at this point, he really has no one to blame but himself. I know he doesn't mind that, because he has said it more than anyone else, that pressure is a privilege, and that is where you have the opportunity to prove yourself. It's not like some weight that's going to prevent you from going and succeeding. It's the sort of thing that is going to be the driving force to push you to that greatness, to achieve those championships. And when you view it that way, it sort of changes the perspective on everything else that goes on in the program. And we've talked about it at length here on this podcast. We have mentioned, and we discussed it just last week. We can revisit it, whether we're talking about recruiting or the way that they do things at every level of the program. Kirby Smart has reframed the discussion about football at the University of Georgia. And that was something that he and Chris Lowe also touched on. Again, here you can see they're discussing the playoff format and what that means and how many opportunities they're going to get moving forward. But as Lowe points out, one of the strengths, and you can read it here on the screen, at Georgia has been finding the coveted recruits who thrive on competition. That's evidenced by 55 NFL draft picks, including 15 first-round draft picks just in the last 8 seasons. So it's Kirby says it. That's what has made us different, is we go out there and evaluate, recruit, and then develop these players and bring them in here. So whether you're talking about on the field performance, whether you are discussing the recruiting, the attention to detail across the program, whether you are discussing what it looks like in the off season, air quotes, off season, when not so many people are focused on your every move, Kirby Smart has developed a plan and implemented a program at the University of Georgia that just makes him different. And that was one of the things that during his discussion with Kirby, Chris Lowe had no issues stating for everyone to hear, which is that he is unquestionably tops among college football coaches, and his program is the envy of the sport. In today's college football world, if you really want to get some people's hackles up, start talking about whose program is better. Because you start thinking about, well, this year we didn't actually win the title, but when you talk about a program, then that encompasses more than a title. And I've discussed this also here on the podcast before. Generally speaking, for it to have any weight, any relevance, what you have to do is look at a 3 to a 5 year window. And you have to look at everything that that program has done during that time. A good year, a bad year, a good recruiting class, a not so good recruiting class, a title, or a season that did not end in a championship. You have to look at it all. So the discussion around a program is different. By any measure, I am standing over here just outside of Athens, Georgia, beating my chest, and will die on this hill and tell you that today the University of Georgia has the best program in college football. This last season, they did not have the best team. That's identified by who wins the championship. Now, you and I could have a discussion about whether or not this team would beat that team and why I might think so. But that is just for killing time. It doesn't matter. None of it matters as far as our opinions are concerned. There was a champion last year. It was not the University of Georgia. So therefore, I can't look at last year and say Georgia had the best team. Do I think they were one of the best 4 teams? I do. Do I think that they would have really made some noise in the playoff? I do. But because of the way the season played out on the field, I cannot with a straight face say that they were the best team last year. It's kind of ludicrous. That's why we actually compete and play the games. I can, however, argue that Georgia is the best program today. So again, if you're talking to the people up in Michigan or shoot, even at Ohio State, certainly if you're having that discussion here inside the SEC, there are people that are going to have varying opinions on that. But across the college football landscape, the consensus, which Chris Lowe echoes here, is that Georgia is without a doubt the top program in college football today. If you think back to where I started this conversation, when Kirby steps to the podium here in Athens to meet with the beat writers and the local reporters who might just have drawn the coverage for that week, he understands that he's talking to a different fan base than if he's sitting down with Chris Lowe. He understands that the people who are following Georgia football day in and day out, they've heard him say these things before. They know exactly how he feels about what he believes his program is and where he thinks this program can go, and what his intentions are about making sure that they achieve those goals. But the national audience doesn't hear that all the time. So when Kirby sat down with Chris and said some of the things he said in this conversation, it got people's attention. That's why I wanted to break out these quotes over the week leading up to this podcast, because I wanted people to see it and be familiar with the fact that Kirby came out with his best fastball. Like he was spitting fire in this conversation with Chris Lowe. He wasn't being bashful or shy or anything about what he expects from his players and his program and himself. As a Georgia fan, I love it. As a fan of an opposing team, well, of course, when a head coach steps up there and says, we believe that we are the best and we have every intention of going and proving it, which is essentially what Kirby has said in this interview. Those other fan bases now have somewhere to throw their rocks. They know exactly who to aim for, what to point out. And that's fine. It's not like Kirby didn't know what he was doing. It makes me wonder, because generally speaking, when you see Kirby in spring, he has a different opinion of his team and where they are right now. He is trying his best to get them to form into the unit that will be on the field in later this year in 24. So you might be a little hesitant to step up and pat him on the back too much, especially a program like Georgia, which has had so much success over the last 7 seasons. That's why it just feels different when I see Kirby step up not only to the local media behind the podium each Monday, but also sit down with various national voices. Chris is just one of many that Kirby has taken time to speak to here during spring practice. He has sat down and repeatedly sounded a little bit giddy, a little bit excited about what he's expecting from his football team this year. As a Georgia fan, that makes me feel awesome, but also a little bit uneasy. I'm like, whoa, this feels weird. I'm not used to hearing my head coach, who is famous for getting after players on the mic and pushing them for every last drop of effort and energy and commitment. I'm not used to hearing him step up here and go, yeah, this player has been dominant in spring ball. Or this player is, in fact, he deserves everything he has received so far because of his performance on the field last year. Or talk about his depth and be like, yeah, this is a unit that is in the top 2 or 3 in the country, if not the best. Like, straight into the camera. I mean, I want to be that confident, but it's hard to do when I don't get to watch practice every day. But it's like Georgia fans love to say, in Kirby, we trust. And if I see him stepping up there in front of the local and national media and being willing to say with his whole chest some of the things he said in this article with Chris Lowe, I'm feeling pretty good about my club right now. I'm not going to lie. It's a long way till we kick the season off. It's a long way until Georgia faces Clemson in the Dome in September. But where we stand right now, I got to say, I'm liking the Dogs. How else can you explain? I mean, I would say it's just the fact that these guys are rookies or they're new to the game or whatever, some sort of throwaway excuse like that to sort of give them some cover. But when you see a player like Micah Morris step to the podium, look the reporter straight in the eye and say, I'm coming for you. Meaning he's going to go attack whoever's on the other side of the ball from him. Where do you think that sort of confidence and belief comes from? Now, Micah's a guy that has played over the last 2 or 3 years. He has some experience. He's a big man. He clearly has athletic ability and has a really good skill set. He knows his way around the offensive line, but he loves the violence and aggression associated with the position he plays. He is an extremely well-spoken, intelligent, and as far as I know, kind young man. That's what he puts across when you hear him talk. But I want my linemen to sound like Micah Morris. How does a head coach feel about a player stepping up there saying, you better have your mouthpiece in because I have mine in and I'm coming for you? That's a bold statement. Doesn't matter if we're still months away from the first game, because that's the kind of statement that's going to resonate from now to SEC Media Days straight into the season. That's not going away. How can he be emboldened enough to step up there in front of the media as someone who has never really spoken to the media before and say that? I'm starting to get the feeling that they are all in on some inside joke that the rest of us here in Dog Nation just aren't privy to yet. That's how I'm starting to feel. Now, I understand that some of this stuff can just be bluster and you can go in one ear and out the other. The thing that makes it different, though, is that there is no history of that at the University of Georgia. They muzzle underclassmen. You don't really get to speak until you have become a team leader. And once you have assumed that mantle and everybody is in agreement, yeah, this is a guy that represents this position room. Once you get that sort of leadership pin on your shirt, that's when you get to go talk to the media. They don't want somebody who is not ready for the bright lights to step up there and say something silly. And then you have this young man step right up to the podium and say what he said. I think that's the sort of thing that lets us know a little bit. It frames our perspective on what this team is capable of in 24. And you say, well, how is it that Kirby Smart is at the top of the college football coaching heap today? How is it that his program is there at the top? Again, this is the kind of thing we talked about last week. And quickly to revisit it, don't forget that way back in 2017, after that loss to Alabama in the national championship game on a miracle play, Kirby looked right in the camera and told us, we are not going anywhere. And everything that's happened since then has only strengthened his position in that statement. I'm not going to lie to you. When I heard that statement, I was like, man, I hope so. I'm with you, Curbs. Let's do it, buddy. That's how I felt. But I was just like everybody else. We don't know that. I'm used to Georgia winning 10 games, winning, 11, 12 games maybe. I have to admit, I didn't know where we were headed. And Kirby has shown me. Remember, I said it's different when Kirby sits down with the national media and he's still willing to step up and say the kind of things that he is saying, just like his young offensive lineman. Just like his young offensive lineman was willing to step up to the camera and say, I'm coming for you. I have a pretty good feeling he's not coming along. And Kirby Smart knows the kind of team he has at his back. That's why I think he's confident enough to step up and say the things he's saying during the spring window. Again, you got to go play the games. We all know the story. It's different this year. It's just different that Kirby Smart's out there spitting fire to national media members in the spring. If you follow this program, you know I'm telling you the truth. You know you don't hear this all the time. Now, again, locally, in the local media, if you follow all the pressers, if you follow all of the everyday ins and outs of what's going on at Georgia football, you've heard things like this before. It's not like Kirby's been bashful about letting you know how he feels.
My expectation is we go out and dominate and create a nightmare and make people never want to play you again.
We just want to be a physical, tough team that goes in there every game and tries to make the other team quit.
There you have it. Kirby has said this before, but generally speaking, all of those press availabilities are against or with the local media. He knows who he's talking to in those fan bases. He's letting you know, well, after tonight's game, we didn't do it the way I want us to do it. Here's how I want us to do it. This is the vision of what I want us to be. So he is keeping us abreast of where he wants the team to go in the season. when they're still forming their identity. But we are nowhere near the season. And Kirby sat down with Chris, and I know Kirby Smart. I've watched him do 1,000 interviews. He sat right down with Chris Lowe, and he said, I want dominance. That's what I expect. Again, I encourage you to head over to ESPN and read this article. Chris did really good work over here. If you're not familiar with it, it would be worth your time. It's not a long read. You can see it here. It'd take you maybe 5 minutes, no more than 10 for sure. But it is worth a read. And the way I ended my string of comments or comment reveals to the public this week, if you follow us on social media, you know. If you don't, what are you doing? I mean, get on over there and get that done. Because there's stuff like this coming out all the time. I want to keep you up to date. I want to build towards what it is we're talking about here on the How About That and DAWGSCAST throughout the week so you know what to expect. And this week, on the agenda, we had Kirby Smart feeling himself and his program as we are in the middle of spring practice. I don't think Kirby views it that way, though. I really don't. It feels odd to me. It feels different and unusual to me as a Georgia Bulldog fan that for decades has watched this team and only very, very recently seen the kind of success that I had always hoped for and wished for as a fan of my university, my alma mater, when it comes to football. We are there. I am walking in high cotton daily, and I know it. And when you look at where Kirby is in his time in Athens, this is season number 9. What did I say a few minutes ago? There's about a 15-year window. So you better maximize your opportunities while you have them. If you're a head coach at a program like Georgia that has a chance to win the national championship every season. It's part of the reason that last year stings the way it does. But I don't want to go down that rabbit trail. We can do that on personal conversations or something else down the line. But back to the point, Kirby Smart has left no room. There is no shelter. No quarter will be given. He has made very clear what his stance is and what he expects from his program. Much like Nick Saban at Alabama said, I know what our fans want. They don't want 10-win seasons. They want to dominate. Kirby spent a number of years over there. Now, this is where the Alabama fans that being an Alabama fan is their only personality. This is where they're going to come running and tell you, built by Bama. It's ridiculous. No, this is just like every other situation throughout the history of mankind. You are influenced by the people that you choose to be around, and put this in your back pocket and keep it with you. You never want to be the smartest person in the room. You always want to be around people that are going to raise your level of performance. They're going to show you what it looks like to achieve more, to chase excellence. It's like I've said before, perfection versus excellence. Understand the difference. But Kirby had all this in him long before he got to Alabama. The thing that made Kirby and Nick such a wonderful partner at Alabama was the fact that they both viewed the world the same way. It's just that Nick had the advantage, the wisdom, the experience of being 20 years older, 30 years older. So of course he's going to be able to impart things that Kirby might put in his toolbox and bring with him moving forward as he built his program into the top program in the country. That's what we've witnessed. Fans can be stupid. I'm a fan. I include myself in this discussion. But the truth of the matter is much closer to what I just said than anything that you're ever going to read on the internet or hear on a call-in show. I know that's not salacious or exciting, and it often makes people flip away. That's okay. I feel much more comfortable sitting here and talking about it this way because the world makes more sense to me when I look at it. Because to me, this is the way it is. This is the way it looks. This is the way the world moves forward. So by my count, Kirby has 7-8 years left if he chooses to have them in Athens. So just how much can he accomplish already? Here's what we'll do. A quick little round of ifs and buts and candies and nuts, and we would all have a Merry Christmas, right? But just look at it. In 2017, if we don't bust a coverage, the Dogs could have won Kirby's first national title. Then, of course, they won it in 21 and 22. And then last year, they trip up in the title game against Alabama and cost themselves an opportunity for what would have been number 4 potentially. Through 8 seasons, the Dogs very easily could have wound up with 4 national championships. Now, this could have obviously gone the other way too. If Ohio State plays the game a little differently, then maybe they beat Georgia and Georgia doesn't win that second consecutive national title. So you see, I'm not stating any of this as fact, but you have to put it on the table and say, yeah, this absolutely could have happened. And if you are a Georgia fan, you have to love that. And if you have a head coach like Kirby Smart, who is not afraid to tell not only his fan base, not only his people who are dyed in the red and black, that he wants to dominate, if he's willing to step up there and tell the national media in more than one location, this is who we are, this is my expectation, this is why we are different. If he will tell that to every recruit, coast to coast, and mean it, and then be able to back it up with the hardware that he's had in Athens, it's impressive. And it makes me feel good about my coach and the direction of my program under said coach. So what does the future hold for the Dogs in 2024? I don't know. I don't know today any more than anybody else. And I would be lying to you if I said that I did. But what I do know is that the belief, the alignment, and as far as I know, the execution of the plan that would make Georgia a dominant program is in place and is running smoothly. Football is a contact sport. It is a violent sport, but injuries can happen at any point and it can change the trajectory of a season before it even begins. I'm knocking on wood that doesn't happen. If you're not a fan of the Georgia Bulldogs, I will knock on wood that it doesn't happen to your team either. But the bottom line is it can, it does. That's the way the world works. But if we just hold chalk, if we look at the roster that Kirby Smart believes he will have heading into the 2024 season, and let me insert the caveat here that we don't know that yet because there is another transfer portal window about to open. Georgia could lose a player or two. They may choose to add a player or two. But if this roster remains virtually intact when the season rolls around and the Dogs kick it off against Clemson, I'm going to roll into that game feeling extremely confident about my team and their prospects for the season. When you've got a leader on the core unit of your football team heading into the season, stepping up to the program, stepping up to the podium, backed up by his head coach, and everyone is reading from the same script, and that young man is not afraid to tell you how he feels about his team, making no bones about the fact that not only is he going to show up and dominate the game in a certain way, but that he believes his teammates will join him in that effort, and that he fears no repercussions coming from his head coach about voicing such an opinion. Again, this feels different. We cannot know what it's going to look like until we see it. Things can change between now and then. But today, this 2024 Georgia Bulldogs team is very, very far from any talk of fraud or pretender or being overrated by some of the people out there with a camera and a microphone who want to tell you something different. I'm telling you that this Georgia football team is going to be a quality football team, and that they have every reason to believe that they should be able to contend for a conference championship and a national championship here in 2024. I also have every reason to believe that the people who subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow our podcast, well, you guys are also among the very best in the country. And it is because of you that I can actually sit here today and say that we are on the road to 10,000, steadily climbing, making our way toward the next big marker here on YouTube as far as subscribers is concerned. There is nothing that you can do that will help us more than to share these videos, the reels, across any of our social media with your friends and other people in Dog Nation, to bring them in and get them to join us. Because the larger this group gets, the faster the momentum grows and the more that we can accomplish together. Because trust me when I tell you that I can't do this without your help. That's just the way the social in social media works. So I appreciate you all for being here. The goal, hopefully, is that we can get to 10K by the time the season starts. So we've got a few months ahead of us. I would appreciate it if you guys would tell a friend and let them know we're out here. Don't forget that we also are available in the audio only format. So if you don't like looking at this smiling face every Wednesday night, then be sure to check us out on Apple Podcasts or anywhere that you get your podcasts, and take us with you anytime to listen to what's going on in the world of Georgia football. Also, go ahead and drop a penny and sign up for the newsletter, because I promise you, we're never going to take your information and do anything funky with it. But if you want to know everything about everything that's going on with the How About That the Dogs cast here at A Damn Beast Media, whether it's promos, new occurrences, new directions for the channel, any of those things, you're going to find out about it first in the newsletter. And of course, I'm going to take a chance right here to say thank you to all of our channel members. You see them on the screen. Without these people, this channel could not happen the way it happens. I know you guys might think that that's an exaggeration. Maybe I'm overstating it. I am not. The only way that I can do what I do for you guys is because of the people who choose to support the channel. If that's something that interests you, I hope you will take an opportunity to check out what we have to offer and maybe give it a shot. So until next time, I want you to take care of yourselves, take care of your friends, take care of your family, and go Dogs!
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.